Good morning. Welcome. We are so excited to be hosting an incredible webinar today on pathways to creative aging, and also when we think about this concept of creative, we also had to be creative about how we were going to film this today, because we wanted to make sure that we were able to do it within the beautiful new Astor Gardens, our new community here in Sherwood Park, but also in a physically distanced environment that worked, that was kind of safe and within all of our own very strict COVID protocols. And so we've made sure we've got sanitized mics, we've made sure we've got physical distancing, we've made sure that Adrian is not too inappropriate or appropriate in the way that he's dressed, sitting or looking, and that Pam looks beautiful as she does today. And so with that, I want to take off my mask to say, hey, we are now in a physically distanced environment where you can take off your mask, so I invite you to do that. And let's start talking about pathways to creative aging. My name is Ali Shivji. I'm one of the principals at Optima Living, and I'm honored to have two incredible guests here as part of our partnership with the University of Alberta. Dr. Pamela Brett-MacLean is an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry, but she's also the director of Arts and Humanities program in Health and Medicine, or AHHM, which I know we'll talk about a little bit and get into more detail. And Dr. Adrian Wagg, who is the chair of Healthy Aging at the University of Alberta, the purveyor of great jokes and a lot of entertainment, but also just a specialist when it comes to, well, we don't talk about the whole bladder part and the whole incontinence part, but also just this part of a great kind of source of information. And it's always a pleasure to have you here, and a pleasure to have you both here. So welcome. So with that, I think we should start by talking a little bit about creative aging, and really, well, Pamela, maybe I'll start with you. Is tell me more about why is creativity even important in life? Where do you think that comes into, and particularly at kind of as people age?
Well, I think it's important at all parts of life, through all stages of life, and certainly is not less important at later stages of life. I think it brings life and liveliness to our lives. It helps us to make meaning, to connect, to put form to understanding or ways that we're exploring the world. Certainly, how I got involved in this area, in this field, related to just feeling like I was overburdened with lots of to-dos, never-ending inbox. And always my interest in arts, which might be taking a painting class or pottery or something, was always relegated to the very bottom of the inbox. And ultimately, what I decided to do after being involved in geriatrics research, as a research associate at the University of British Columbia, I undertook a dissertation to study creativity and the contributions of that to human development, learning, and growth, and did so looking at people who came to art in later life, actually.
And I know we're going to unpack that in a little bit more detail, because I think there's so much to learn and think about on that. Adrian, your thoughts on this? When you think about creativity, when you think about that aspect of how it adds purpose and stuff in later life,
Pam is absolutely right. At all stages in life, there's no reason to suspect that older people won't derive the same benefit that either you or I do in earlier life. And I think there are emerging data for those with cognitive impairment and can show that the benefits of engagement in creative pursuits, certainly in terms of, and we've talked about responsive behaviours before, and so that these so-called behavioural and psychiatric symptoms of dementia. You can show demonstrable improvements as people engage with creative activities. I think, Pam, you showed me the data from that lovely program in New York a few years ago, the arts program that taken off with amazing results for people experiencing memory impairment.
And I think, for us, we've always looked at this, and I've also, we personally look at this in the context of people come to live with us for some of the last chapters of their lives. But in most books, the last chapters are actually the most exciting ones. So why should they be any different here, right? And how do we do that? And I think there's this sometimes this feeling that, someone is moving into a community, moving into a facility, and we hate the word facility, so we use the word community for a lot of our own communities, and that because they've moved in, their life has stopped. And And our attempt is to always try to think about how do we change that. And so I'm coming back to like, what are some examples you've seen of people that have been displaying or even maybe realizing some of their creativity later on in life, and what are some of the benefits to them in terms of the physical, social, emotional? Like what types of things have you seen in your research and the work that you've done?
Well, there's a lot in your question, and we could spend the rest of the time just talking about that, and we will. I know we'll be touching on it. So what I would start with is that I think that there are lots of different pathways into creativity, and sometimes it's through opportunities to be introduced in a setting like this. But different pathways might include those who have been involved with the arts throughout their lives and don't want to, as they retire in some way, would never think of retiring from being an artist, or wanting to be engaged, immersed in an aesthetic, vital sort of environment. And I know that when I was first working on this, Joy Coghill received she's very, very well renowned for her contributions to children's theatre and later in life for advocating for spaces that artists could retire into and stay connected. And there are many of those actually examples, not many, but several I'm aware of in the States, and I'm not sure so much here at this point in Canada. Something to look into. But and then there are those who wanted to get involved with the arts earlier on in their life, but were dissuaded from doing so. A number of the people that I studied in my dissertation research were in that category, and couldn't wait until they retired to take it up, and in a serious way. And that second chapter of their life was going to be their career, become a second career in the arts. Others come about it just by happenstance in a way. It was luck. It might be that a child buys their retired father or parent an art class, and then they find it there. Or it could be here in a setting like this, where there might be lots of arts opportunities or experiences, or in community settings, etc. And then they find that they've come to explore this is really interesting, and then that takes them on a new journey of learning and discovery, etc.
And we had a resident here who painted his first painting after 40 years, but used to paint a lot. And it's a fascinating concept to be able to help people to enable themselves to engage in a way that they can just also find their creative, genes, pursuits, stuff, etc. When you think about creativity, though, is it just, and would you define it as just art? Would it be other stuff? Like, what are examples of creativity that you've seen that have been very interesting, that have actually maybe rejuvenated people?
Well, there's all sorts of forms of art, and Adrian, I'd be interested in your thoughts about this as well. In terms of, we can be creative in all sorts of different ways in our life, but the arts themselves offer particular kinds of forms that are very powerful in contributing to one's own aesthetic engagement with the world and making meaning, etc. But anything can be done creatively. Woodworking, would you consider that creative? Yeah. I think so, certainly. One of the ways that creative arts were first introduced in Canada in retirement or continuing care settings was through the veterans centers after the Second World War. When vets came back, many with PTSD, and the Red Cross introduced arts-based programming. If you look at, early on I looked at amazing centers that had woodworking studios, textile studios, painting and other, and celebrations of the expression and accomplishments that people had as well. So, your thoughts?
The roots of occupational therapy brought a lot of those things into the mainstream, didn't they, around that time, and have flourished with much more, I suppose, creative and imaginative adoption of arts and creativity. And I agree with you that it doesn't need to be painting and art. It can be woodworking or some very practical diversion. even making practical things. My own example, putting together beehives, I find very relaxing, just a complete diversion from one's normal life, and allow you to relax, and there are huge benefits in that engagement and being out of one's normal self. I think the data largely support that.
And you know what's interesting is we've also found that if we empower our staff to and allow them to be creative about solving problems, about thinking through stuff, then they also are both a lot more engaged and excited, but they can do fun things. I mean, good examples, we had a resident move into one of our sites, and he was a winemaker, and his family wanted to throw away all of the winemaking stuff. And our staff said, well, why can't we keep it? And we said, okay. And so I remember walking into the site the other day and seeing something plugged in a cabinet, and I'm like, what is going on here? And literally they're making wine, and Bob is engaged, and he's doing stuff, and he's alive in a way that his family thought they hadn't seen him for a while. Or Ben, I mean, here at Astor Gardens, the Ben came in, and he had just lost his wife 4 days before he moved in. And they had picked the suite together, but he wanted to move in, he came to move in, and one of the staff, during one of the many discovery times that we've empowered them to spend time with our residents on, found out that he loved ping pong. And so they said, okay. And so we give our staff the ability to be creative and figure out stuff, and they bought a ping pong table and they got it set up, and today I walked downstairs and there's a resident. So Ben was playing ping pong, as he does every day now. But there was a resident here who has some cognitive impairment. She's living with a dementia. She's still very active, engaged, but her family worries about her a lot. And she was playing ping pong today. And it was something that her family had not seen her do for 2 or 3 years, but knew that she liked it at some point in time. And so I think when we create those environments as well, and I'd love to talk a little bit about what you've seen about environments to spawn creativity. Because what you realize very quickly is that a building is just 4 walls. It's about what we try to do inside of it, what we enable to do inside of it, and it's helpful to see what have you seen about ways that people have enabled creativity, and how do we create those spaces?
Well, I think that the example you just provided about creating opportunities for an individual's passion and interest, and that can be contagious. It can really encourage other people to become interested in the same thing and try something that they might not have tried before, and that's awesome. Having spaces, having celebrations, exhibitions of some sort of work, thinking outside of the box. That's so amazing what you are encouraging among your staff here to contribute to the life and liveliness of this setting. Will just continue building and bring your ideas forward. What would you like?
And it echoes to that idea of people that choose to enter into congruent living. We often provide everything for them and they become redundant. And I know we've talked about this before. If we make people redundant, it's very easy to lose sense of purpose. It contributes to social isolation, physical deconditioning, intellectual decline. So you can almost imagine, like the example you gave, why not have a show and tell of Bob the winemaker? This is what he does, and people may well engage with that and take it up themselves. Who knows? But that opportunity in that setting and how you take advantage of the human assets you have aren't just your staff, are they? They are the residents themselves. I'm sure there's some great science with which I'm not familiar and I've been thinking about is what a great observational laboratory in terms of building a community, a real integrated community. And it'd be lovely to do some experimentation. So that's probably the wrong way of putting it.
No, we're all open to that. We experiment every day, so we should discuss that further, because I think there are ways to encourage that. But there's also, we talk a little bit about this idea of people, place, and community. And when we think about people, we think about bringing the right people together, thinking through that in that regard, creating that right place, but then allowing community to be really built from that. And we see physical buildings as ways that they can be hubs for the community. But then how do you encourage community engagement is something that we're always open to. And I guess that it's an interesting question to come back to, or to spend a little more time on saying, okay, how do we encourage individuals to be creative? It feels like a simple question, but the average person today, they're stressed, they're worried about COVID, they're worried about this, they're worried about that, they're not how do we allow people to step back and be more creative?
Lots of ways, I think. A couple that just popped to mind. This is just thinking on the spot. You might want to. I'm thinking through to my own program right now in the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. Different ways that we sort of put a spotlight on contributions of arts and humanities education to the education of health professionals. Create events and bring people out. It sort of, engages them and gives them a real taste, a real experience of what the possibilities of that are. And so by encouraging that interest, helps them to develop different ideas, imagine things that they might like to continue to experience. They're just going back to something I was thinking about a little while ago, and I'll circle back here. And there's both active and more passive participation in creative activities. So you could be an observer of music or attend an exhibition, and there are wonderful benefits of that as well that have been documented through the research in terms of stress reduction and just feeling better and with a more positive outlook on the rest of the day. They did some studies of office workers who at lunchtime, if they went to an art exhibition and took an art for the lunch hour, it just changed the way that they felt through the rest of the day and through the week. So at any rate, so bringing events in would be one thing, and it might encourage people to go, well, we can do this ourselves. We have brought in artists in residence who have created different kinds of opportunities. We've had poets who have listened to people and their stories and reflected back what they heard through poetic form. So something that's really meaningful to them, and then sort of inspiring, this poems are really quite amazing. And so, if there's a workshop or knowing what's around in the community or might be available here, might come out. So those are a couple of things that pop to mind.
I like that idea of finding ways that people could think about, well, could I do it myself? Like maybe having something where you have a concert or you have some sort of art, and I guess like art classes are a great example, right? Where you do have a painter that goes through and then takes people through the steps, but I think more and more of like, how could we almost incorporate ways where we do have specific creative pursuits, maybe it's a presentation, maybe it's some sort of performance, but then it's followed up by a series of activities where the residents can actually try it themselves and just see if they like it, right? Or see if there's something that comes to mind.
When I was in a graduate residence at the University of British Columbia, Green College, it was sort of like this. And so I sort of look forward to being here later in my life. And we had an arts committee, that residents comprised and developed ideas for the year as well and brought ideas forward. So providing some leadership and leading different ideas.
And I guess you don't have to do it all yourself, because we talked a bit about community integration of congregate living facilities. If you offered space to local clubs and societies to come in, you'll get residents involved and engaged from in the opposite direction. So a real bi-directional relationship of residents with the facility might prevent you having to stress about providing everything yourself. But engaging with the talent you have in residence is clearly important.
Yeah. Sometimes people are really scared that, we're going to do something that may bother someone. And, it's very interesting even in these environments. And yet part of it is we like to, in some cases, you almost want to stir up a little bit of controversy to see what has a little bit of interest, right? So we had, we have about $100,000 of art in this building. And we unintentionally, just because of deliveries and everything else, it's become phased in terms of when it's being put up. So one of the first pieces behind you, this moss wall, which was a local oil executive who decided to leave his job because he was passionate about moss. And he and I met on a book club. And I was like, wait a second, you're in Sherwood Park, you like moss, we want to do a living wall, how do we do that? And he came up with this piece called the family tree. That's one piece. Anyways, we've got a bunch of other pieces in the building, and some are very controversial. But it's really fun to watch people go and say, oh, I don't like, oh, but maybe I do like that. Oh, but it starts this conversation. So we said, well, actually, I think from now on, we're going to unveil the art slowly. We shouldn't put it up all at once, but we should let people engage with it and then keep places where people can put up their own art. And so we've actually designated 2 large areas in the building where we've basically set it up to have a community gallery. So not only do we want residents to put up their art, but we want their grandkids to come put up their art next to it. We want people in the community to be part of this. Again, that people, place, and community. We want our sites, our buildings, to become places that are hubs for that community. And obviously, right now, it's an exceptional time. But we don't design places for short periods of time. We design them for generations, and how we think through that. But it is coming back to this idea of both encouraging, but also sometimes pushing people to think a little bit out of their comfort zone. Because then maybe you don't have to do everything yourself, but people may also start to think creatively about different areas when they say, well, I don't like that, let's try something different.
I think engaging, Pam, you mentioned people who want to take things up later in life that they may never have tried before. And I think there's still a very common belief that aging is one of chronic and continued decline, and it's impossible. And we, in younger life, we talk about how to defeat the inner critic. Are there any data on how you do that with older people? I couldn't possibly take up painting. It'll be rubbish. I'll be stupid. How do you go about that kind of barrier?
Well, I think that I'm not quite sure. I think one thing, creating space is a phrase I love. And so I really liked your idea around creating opportunities for the discussion, not putting all the art up right away, but giving space and time for that. I think similarly, perhaps, is a developmental thing, this, encouraging interest or recognizing interest and confirming it, like saying, so you used to be, you wanted to be an artist at one point. That's so interesting. And you became a teacher because, your parents, but why not try it now? And just kind of be encouraging. A number of years ago, I think it was in about 2008, and I think it continued on to about 2015, we had the Creative Age Festival in Edmonton. So it was once a year, and we had a number of different events that sort of try to encourage awareness of the positive possibilities of creative aging, promote quality programming in the area, have people come out and experience something, and so maybe that would inspire their interest. We would have films. There's a number of films that documented creative aging. People have come together in choirs and done amazing things, and with that, taking on forgetting the rock band, but it was this contrast between age and this choir doing all these rock band hits. So films, experiences. Having aging older artists come and talk about their life in arts, symposium, lots of things, I think. Oh, and I did have a thought too about this, and that was in terms of the community engaged sort of aspect, and thinking about artist residencies perhaps. There's lots of examples of intergenerational arts programming that can provide lots of different ideas. But one, I think, that's kind of newly coming to mind for me are the opportunities for students in the arts to do internships, perhaps, and develop a good sense of how they could perhaps introduce arts programming and other things through their lens and their practice, et cetera, et cetera.
We talked a lot previously, Ali, about the benefits of physical exercise on health and well-being and the physiological changes associated with engagement in physical exercise. We have an expert here who can talk about the impact of creativity, and there are some fascinating data there. I think you were talking earlier about that.
And you'd like me to comment on that right now?
I'd love you to comment on it, because it's incredible, isn't it, that how one's changes in emotional state and mental well-being can have observable and measurable physiological changes that we know have a benefit on health. And please. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll first comment on this in terms of the dissertation research that I did, where I looked at the stories of 7 people who came to take up art in later life following retirement. One, Mary Topping, I think she was in her early 80s when we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, when she thought to herself, well, if I don't sign up for a BFA now, when am I going to do it? She'd been thinking about it and thinking, well, it was worthwhile, and ended up being involved in a women's art collective. And where I met her at the McMullen Gallery at the University of Alberta Hospital, her work, which is just stunning, wonderfully sculptural, etc., and the other 2 women that she was exhibiting with. And she was doing a workshop that I participated in. So now she's in her late 80s when I first met her, and she told these wonderful stories of all that she's learned and all she's gotten to experience newly and know of herself, finally coming to have that opportunity to realize her own artistic aspirations. She was well known for her garage studio, and people would visit there, so it was really wonderful and wild. So hearing stories like that is really quite amazing. But all of the artists who were either participating in the art world by exhibiting their work in galleries, or had undertaken this as a serious leisure opportunity, it created a structure for their life that kept on leading them forward, that was rewarding unto itself, that contributed in ways of actually seeing the world differently, because you start appreciating the aesthetics of your environment, and have that yen, you feel called to create something around something that strikes you. The relationships that they developed through that, new knowledge, mastery of skills, all of that was just wonderful and amazing. And so yes, a sense of flourishing, a sense of expansion of their lives, a sense of flow experiences. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow, that might be familiar to many, that idea of just getting lost and immersed in such an enjoyable way in something that you're so involved in, where your ability matches exactly with what the challenge is, and then the horizon on that keeps on moving forward. But yes, so there are lots of different things in that. In addition, we conducted a scoping review. This was led by Dr. Kim Fraser from the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Alberta, where we reviewed 92 published articles that considered the impacts of arts engagement on quality of life during this period, in later life, and incredible number of impacts in terms of mental health, emotional well-being, social wellness, physical health, so the better sleep, all sorts of positive things that, from enjoying your own life. I think you described that very well, Adrian, when you start becoming alienated from your life, and it just gets progressively bringing you to an unhealthy way of living in your own skin. And but such things as creative aging and arts engagement can promote more healthy experiences, physical, social, emotional, on and on, learning, development and growth, and also a sense of legacy, or being seen, being visible somehow, and your own appreciation of who you are and valuing yourself in the moment, and seeing that, and seeing others as well through their art as well, or their appreciation of art.
It is almost, in some ways, there are different periods of time in your life where you can reset what your identity looks like, or is, or as you perceive it to be, right? I mean, you think about, I guess there's different stages, maybe when you go to college, when you come back, when you have a new job, when you're maybe move to a new neighborhood or a new home, or what. But there's also an interesting time where it gives you the ability to reset by moving into a congregate living environment where you can be who you want to be, who you always wanted to be, and that's sometimes scary, but it's also sometimes really exciting to know that I can bring certain things with me, but I can also, start a new life, or I can try new things, or I don't have to be limited by. And I guess that's what we try to do, is we try to say, look, how do we help people live their best life? How do we just remove as many barriers as possible, and then just let their wings fly, right? And see what happens along the way. And if we have some bad tasting wine along the way, that's okay. But if we, if the ultimate kind of final thing is that you've got discussion and engagement and people feel alive and they look forward to that, then that's where I think all these areas, we've talked about purpose, we've talked about physical engagement, we've talked about mental engagement, social engagement, all of that really comes back to your quality of life. And how we think through that is a really important part, and how to continue to create that space for sure.
And being open to thinking differently as well, like wondering what more can we do, or how can we do this differently, and being open to people's suggestions and ideas. You were going to say something.
No, I just think it's certainly, it's very much on point at the moment. The government of Alberta, their main concentration now for seniors and continuing care is quality of life. What care interventions, what interventions generally can we introduce across the continuum of care that will improve people in later life, their quality of life, in the place they choose, or because of physical impairment or memory impairment, they have to live. And I think that's really very venerable and admirable, because it opens the Pandora's jar a bit to let some of that out that we've really kind of been constrained to now. Yeah,
and I think again in the theme of today's webinar, we can be creative about some of these areas, and we don't have to. COVID for us has been a mixed blessing, right? And I think there are pros and cons, but it's also we've also found that it has increased significantly the amount of family engagement with their loved ones, maybe through devices, but the ability to have human connection in a different way has actually increased during this period of time. Whereas other people were really busy before, they lived in distances, they couldn't visit mom often. Now they're able to FaceTime them regularly, they're able to engage in a conversation with them regularly or do things. And I think there is quality of life needs to always be our focus. And I know at Optima it has always been this idea of how do we look at creating that quality of life, how do we welcome people home, but that needs to continue to be the focus to do that. And I guess the question that I'd love to ask you both is okay, someone is open to being creative. They've watched this program today, they've done other things, they'd like to be there, but what resources exist that would help people start doing that if they lived at home, if they lived in other environments? What have you seen in terms of resources in the community that help facilitate kind of creative engagement and creative aging?
Seniors councils, I'm sure community-based seniors councils will have lots of resources and an inventory of activities, etc.
Yes, so the seniors community organisations,
yes,
which there are several in Sherwood Park and around Edmonton. Of course, as you say, that coronavirus has rather stymied some of their operations. They've gone online, but they're a great source of information and advice for those things as a first step, I guess. Just knowing what's there.
Yeah, and just arts, community arts centres as well. We'll have wonderful offerings. So it's possible to look at, how to create awareness, perhaps support uptake, and how somebody might be a point person for that, whether it's a resident themselves or a resident committee or along with staff.
Yeah, and I guess there's always like local festivals, there's theater groups and others. I think that there are many arts-based organizations that are also looking for ways to help further both meet their mandate but also help others. And I think one thing that I'd love to encourage people to do is to think a little bit out of the box a little bit about saying, look, if there's areas that you're interested in, reach out to the organizations in your community that are doing some of those things, because you may be surprised that there may be a great synergy. There may be a great way to work together and to help more than just yourself as you go through that. It doesn't have to be just in a congregate living environment. It can be by just calling your local theater company. It can be looking at this, the different festivals and other stuff. As I said, a lot of people have been stymied, but a lot of people have gone online. I know I used to sit on the board of Theatre Calgary for many years, and they last year, I think for 50 years, or at least 25 years, they've done the Christmas Carol. And so last year they did it online. and you could watch it online. It was the first time they've ever done that, but it was actually incredible. It was very well done. My 3-year-old was really interested in it, let alone all of us. And so I think that it has. This is also a really interesting time to say that all of us could have creative impact on organizations around us, and we shouldn't underestimate how important that can be and how much of an impact we can have.
And you can do it yourself here. There's some opportunities to enhance things that might already be occurring. I'm recalling an experience that we had when I was in Vancouver, working with a retirement center, and they had put a request out. The members, they had a theater group. They read plays, and they wanted somebody to come out who could be a bit of a discussant from the theater department at UBC. And so a colleague of mine said, well, Pam, I know you're really interested in this, so do you want to do it together? And we did. And this is sort of another thing as well, to kind of inspire thinking or thinking a bit differently. It was the centenary, I think it was Oscar Wilde's birth or death, I can't remember. But we ended up reading some of Oscar Wilde, so that was provided a little bit of a focus. And then we thought, and invited them to think about, well, would they want to do a reader's theater presentation? There was a room that was called Theater Room in this setting, and but it had never been used for a performance. It was used to watch, movies, and at any rate, they were a bit nervous about that. Not really, because some people couldn't read really easily or well, so we ended up using big tabloid sheets of paper, really big font, and we practiced. We did up a marquee. We had photos of all of the actors. We paid attention to sort of what people were wearing, and we set up the theater as a theater, and everybody sat behind a desk, and off we went. And it was the importance of being earnest, but we renamed it the importance of being wild, with the idea of this is kind of wild. People were lined up outside. We had to think about where all the different wheelchairs would go, because some people had wheelchairs. So there were different things we had to think about. But it was astounding, the response of the audience and the actors themselves for participating in this. They appreciated how moving from reading and a sort of book club discussion to performance just gave so much more to the whole community. Again, so many people talked about it afterwards, different sort of controversial aspects of Oscar Wilde's life came up, and the focus and theme of the play itself. So just always interesting how you can suggest maybe doing something that builds in a progressive developmental way.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm also, just as even from your earlier point, I'm thinking, I wonder if we should have like artists in residence here. Like, why not, right? Like, why not have more creative pursuits as you think through that? There's a lot of stuff from that perspective.
So I think it's important to remember to all of us to try to be as creative as we can, introducing creativity or opportunities for creativity, and sharing those so we can inspire each other.
Absolutely.
You're putting in a garden for folks to grow stuff, vegetables or flowers or both?
Upstairs, so we have a rooftop patio. So just actually where all the skylight is in, there's a rooftop patio. There's a putting green, there's a rock garden, and there is an area for gardening. So we have raised planters. So Chef is going to be growing his spices and stuff up there as well. But we also have an area for gardening there. Within our memory care...
gardening is another, yes.
Gardening's a huge one. Yeah, no, absolutely. And
then, there's, of course, the animal husbandry is also being used with very much a therapeutic impact on people with high anxiety and agitation on what's something called the neuropsychiatric index. Goats and chickens and stuff like that. Incredible. You can just be creative about how you do it. Whether you want a herd of goats just wandering through, I'm not quite sure. But
well, it's funny you say that, because yesterday there was a water bowl on the floor, and I was like, why is there a water bowl on the floor? But we do have pets, and we welcome. We almost like to say, like, pets, you're welcome to bring your owners with you when you come to our residences, because it's almost like how can you not?
Can residents bring their pets with them and stay?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a big part of our kind of quality. I think we have. So in addition to the many residents we have here, I think we have 3 or 4 four-legged residents as well that live in the building and are part of the part of the community, for sure. So if we...
Yeah. No, I was about 13. A lady down the road from us entered a sheltered accommodation. She couldn't take her pet. So I inherited a parrot, which then was adopted by my mother when I went for medical school. It died about 2 years before she died. It was about 80. Dreadful thing it was. Yeah. Horrible.
Well, my first pet was a little bird. It was a bird, and I used to tell my kids it's really funny because she used to sit on my shoulder, but whenever my brother was mean to me, she'd fly over and poop on his head. And so I always loved the fact that I had my bird, but there is something about this idea of like, at the end of the day, all the things that we're doing, be it the creative pursuits, be it engaging people's purpose, really it's just engaging that inner kind of spark, right? That you're finding a way to bring people alive. And so, I mean, Pam, it'd be helpful to understand, like, if you were to think about, and I know some of your research has been around this, but how would you define kind of some of the creative pathways that people have endeavored on, or that you've seen people go on in journeys in that regard?
Well, everybody's very individual, of course, and I would share this, that I agree with Ellen Dissanayake, who comes from a more anthropological perspective on arts and creativity, that art making things is just a basic aspect of being human. And to do that with sensitivity, developing sensitivities and sensibilities, an aesthetic nature adds to the liveliness and life, as you've mentioned. So some people have that all their lives and experience it. Others know that they very much want to do this, but they've been, followed a more practical approach, perhaps, to life to ensure, an income or this, that, and the other thing, and but come look at retirement as the time to really fully begin to explore this. And others, there's an interest, or an appreciation, perhaps, but it might be because they were encouraged to do so or had the opportunity to, and then found that there was this interest, that because of the benefits of it, the way it contributed to their life, continue to explore it. So it does matter, the environments that are available and the opportunities, and I think that appreciating this and supporting it is really, really important in all our settings.
Adrian, if you think about it, and I know we touched on it a little bit earlier, but it'd be helpful, for the average audience member to really kind of capture this moment of saying, like, why does it have the effect it does? Like, why does this, getting creative, trying these different things, why does it have that effect on quality of life?
Well, I think we touched on those tenets of healthy aging, and if intellectual engagement and social engagement are two of the very core pillars, engagement in creativity per se hits those buttons, and you can see observable benefits in terms of, say, other chronic diseases. You can see changes in blood pressure, changes in heart rate. You can see stress hormone changes associated with engaging in those things. So the emotional, the reactive becomes purely physiological. You can see things changing and people getting, if you like, for want of a better word, healthier because of it. The internship idea is a really good one, isn't it? If you provided facility or an opportunity, it would be really great studies for qualitative work with residents at this stage.
No, look, I'm all over it. I'm to the point of, like, we were just talking today, we want to actually have some internships this summer for students here, and one we were thinking about is actually finding an art history student who would be good at writing as well, to help us basically curate and tell the story of the artwork in this building, but do it in a way that becomes like a creative engagement effort. I think in the artists and residents, the beauty about right now where we're at is we have, as you lease up a building like this, you have empty suites. You have the ability to say, well, maybe we should do an artist in residence. Maybe we should have an internship. Maybe we should have something that has some sort of benefit for students in a meaningful way.
There's the shadowing. We have an elective at the university, shadowing artists on the wards. So we have artists on the hospital wards. So we have musicians visiting, patients at the bedside, writers, creative writers, and painters, visual artists, etc. And they just start where the patient is and they'll create something together. And that has been really amazing. And what I love doing is having our medical students shadow along and appreciate how you can just open to a patient's story. And what they note very often is the contrast between the typical approach to the medical interview and history taking, and how just being open to the patient, how much you learn from that. So that's really lovely.
My brain's flowing just about like all the creative things we could do here, about saying, one, could you have an artist in residence? Could you have people come? Could you have people create art together, you know, display it, kind of have a show, and then put it up? But how do we create that that environment? So I'm all over thinking about that. And even if there are students that we can, you know, bring on board this summer and do stuff with, like we have the ability to do that. It's a great time for us to be creative. So I'm welcome to think through how we could do that, or even if there are some specific students or ways we can do that. Because I think it'd be great to be part of, you know, part of our ongoing partnership with U of A is to think through that part, for sure. We've covered a lot today, and you know, we spent some time talking about this idea of like, what does it mean to be creative? What are pathways to creative aging? We spoke a little bit about the benefits of being creative and engaged. We talked a little bit about how to enable creativity, examples of individuals that have done that, what environments can help do that. We've also talked a little bit about, you know, organizations and how you can actually get involved and start to think. And I think, if nothing else, I hope we've started to demystify this aspect of to be creative at any stage in life, but particularly for us and our focus on the as people age or as get into later stages of life, is like, it doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be something that's perfect. It needs to be something that just allows you to embrace your inner, you know, creative spirit, or at least feel alive. And how do we ultimately help welcome people home? How do we help allow the last chapters of their lives to be just the most exciting, the most readable, the most engaging? You just don't want to put that book down, or you don't want to put that overall engagement down. And that's been a very helpful discussion today, and I'm sure there'll be many more things that come out of it. Well, again, thank you everyone for coming. It's been great to have you all here. I think, you know, in our COVID protocols, I'm going to put my mask back on. I'm going to go back to our daily life in here, but it's also a great time to take that 2 minutes or that time together today to think creatively, think out of the box, and not be limited, but maybe be enhanced by the mixed blessing that we have as COVID. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day.